Once again, welcome to the June edition of GET webinar series. My name is Ifeoluwa Alabi, and I'll be moderating today's section. And the topic for the June edition of GET webinar series is how prepared is Africa for a biological warfare lessons. How prepared is Africa for a biological warfare? Lessons from the war in Sudan. As you may know by now, that there was a report in the month of April that there is the capital of Sudan, Khartoum, had a conflict where one of the national biological laboratory was held on hostage, and it was recorded that the national biological laboratory happens to house samples of measles and then samples of cholera, and there's a bit of conversation around it that if care is not taken, this might lead to proliferation of biological samples, which at the long run can turn to a biosecurity threat, such that those samples can be used as objects of biological warfare. And as you may also know that Africa, I'm just going to go through before we invite our speakers on board. I'm going to go through a particular background which I would like us to listen to. As you may know by now that Africa has experienced and is currently experiencing an increase in the frequency and intensity of emerging infectious diseases in recent years. And these diseases are either caused naturally or they've been caused by man-made. And then also with the increase in modern biotechnology and also with the increase in molecular research activities in Africa, there seems to be a bit of concern in terms of the safety of the biological weapons which are kept in our laboratories or which are kept in our laboratories. And there's a bit of also conversation that these biological samples are to be kept safe from being handled by non-state actors, which they can use them as objects of biological warfare, which can also lead to bioterrorism. The June edition of GET webinar series is focusing on discussing the level of preparedness. When I'm talking about the level of preparedness, we're talking with respect to the policies, we're talking with respect to the institutions, and we're talking with respect to the strategies of African countries against bioterrorism on the continent. The specific objective that the webinar, this edition of GET webinar is targeted at achieving is that we're going to be discussing policies, we're going to be discussing institutions, and we're going to be using this webinar to discuss strategies that can be designed to prevent bioterrorism and biological warfare in Africa. Also, we are also looking at this edition of GET webinar to achieve, we're going to be looking at how we can identify ways and how we can also strengthen surveillance systems in Africa for the early detection and also prevention of biological threats in Africa. And then also today's webinar will be achieving how we can provide policy recommendation for strengthening biosecurity in Africa. Once again, I want to welcome you in case you're just joining us. My name is Ifeoluwa Alabi, and I'll be moderating the June edition of GET webinar, which is focused on how prepared is Africa for a biological warfare, lessons from the war in Sudan. Like I earlier mentioned, in the month of April, there was a report that there's a conflict in the capital of Sudan, Khartoum, where the terrorists that were involved had in hostage the national laboratory, which houses the samples of cholera and measles. And there's a bit of concern in such a way that the terrorists are not going to use the samples to cause a biological warfare. All right, we have lines of our speakers here. And before I introduce our speakers, I would like to give us the ground rule, not really rule. I just want to intimate us to how today's webinar is going to follow. I want you to know that at the bottom of your screen, you have your question and answer chat box. This is the chat box you're going to use to drop your questions in case you have any questions during the presentation of our speakers. And also we have the chat box, and the chat box is where you get to you introduce yourself, you tell us your name, and then also because we'd like to meet you, and also you also let us know about where you're actually connecting from. Once again, I want to appreciate you for joining us. All right, so the time is now for me to introduce, I'll be introducing our speakers. Like I said, we have lines of our speakers who are experts in the field of biosecurity, and they'll be doing justice to the topic that we have for today. Okay, so the first line on the speaker, we have Dr. Jorit, but unfortunately is before just close to the webinar, there's an official engagement, so you might not be joining us. But I want you to be rest assured that our other lines of speakers will definitely do justice to today's webinar. The first speaker that we're going to bring in on board is Dr. Levin Damisah. I would like to read Dr. Levin Damisah biography for us to know who he is and also his area of expertise. So Dr. Levin Damisah is the Chief Medical Officer and the Head of Medical Intelligence in the Office of National Security Advisor, the Presidency, Abuja. He studied medicine from the University of Benin and Masters in Public Health from the SRM University, India. His job description as a clinician and a geo-development analyst saw him taking courses in global public health and further trainings at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health on leadership and management training for emerging healthcare executives and radiological emergency communication and terrorism. He's also an executive education alumnus of Harvard Kennedy School of Government, Boston, USA, for a course on national and international security for senior executive. Dr. Levin recently completed his master's in strategic management and policy studies at the postgraduate school of the Nigerian Defense Academy in conjunction with the Nigerian Army Resource Center. Some of Dr. Levin's national assignments include membership of the National Security Strategy Drafting Committee. He is a technical lead linking public health to the security authorities of the WHO/NCDC. He is also the Security Logistics and the Mass Care Committee of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. And Dr. Levin also is a member on the National Crisis Management Doctrine Committee. He's also a member of the National Action Plan on Countermeasures, amongst many others. I want to reassure you, looking at the bio, you can be sure that Dr. Levin is an expert and he will surely do justice to the topic that we have. So Dr. Levin will be talking on the topic, assessing strategies to combat bioterrorism and biological warfare in Africa. It's such a pleasure to have Dr. Levin on the call. So Dr. Levin, kindly turn on your camera so that our participant can see you before we have your presentation.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see your screen and your presentation is also live.
Okay, I'll prepare. Okay.
All right, Dr. Levin, you have the ground for your presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is okay, yes, past 12. Am I loud and clear?
Yes, you're very loud and clear.
Okay. Good afternoon to our highly esteemed audience in this afternoon presentation. It's a great privilege to be picked out of the many experts across Africa. We believe that Africa is not in debt of experts, just opportunity. So I do not take this for granted. Sorry, Mr. Feolua, before I proceed, is it the time, right? The time allocated?
Yes, we have 20 minutes
okay, good.
For your presentation, sir.
All right, okay. So we are looking at how prepared is Africa for a biological warfare, lessons from the war in Sudan. I do know that at the beginning of this year, nobody knew what happened in April will take place. And it brings to fore how clear, how close we are. So what we'll be learning across many fora, different seminars, different classrooms. So it's something that has come to stay and something we need to wake up to, the reality. Now, I'm looking at assessing strategies to combat bioterrorism and biological warfare in Africa. I remember when I was outside the country on a course when the first bomb explosion happened in Nigeria. I think it was something Independence Day or so. And I spoke with one of my directors who said, Damisah, is what happened. You know, it sounded so strange back then, 2010. But we know down the line, we have had a lot of IED explosion. Before now, when you hear of suicide bombing, you think it's far from Africa. Africans love life, Nigerians love life, but that has not proven to be the case. So when we are looking at combating bioterrorism, I don't want us to see it as if being far-fetched. They say if you don't learn from history, you are bound to make the same error generations in the past made. So it is in that context that this topic will be taken. As form of outline, this is just an outline, a bit of introduction. Protocols, I think, is being done already. Forms of threat, biosecurity in context, bioterrorism, and biological warfare, COVID-19 and global economics. But that seems to be the most recent biological, we'll not say warfare or bioterrorism, but something very close to that. And then strategies for combating bioterrorism and biological warfare, BTBW, and then a call to action. Africa is a very large continent, resource rich, endowed. I was reading somewhere that the map of the world is disproportionate, that Africa is actually far bigger in land mass than other continents. Whatever it is, Africa is not a small continent. When you need to fly hours from Cape Town to Algeria, you know that Africa is big. Or from Senegal to Eritrea, across Africa, you know that Africa is big. And despite our large size in land mass and population, there seems to be a disconnect in capacity that we are looking at. That's why we feel that we owe it a duty to see that we see Africa as our own land. Taking into account, this is quite a busy slide, unlike me, but just to capture the essence that Africa has taken it very serious, taking into account the health challenges faced by the African citizens. The African Union, as of states, established African CDC. This in 2015 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And the idea is that Africa CDC shall work with the World Health Organization and other multi-sectoral partners and external partners, as well as African CDC regional collaborating centers to pursue the strategies objective of the center. What this also means is that health security has become a topical issue. Before now, when security is discussed or mentioned, very few persons look at security in the form of health. But health security has become a core pillar of national and global or international security. And again, between 2016 and 2019, a lot of African countries had this WHO-backed or sponsored joint external evaluation, which aimed at looking at health system resilience, health system capability of different countries. I was privileged to be part of Nigerian JE in 2017 and the mid JE in 2019, in which the 19th thematic area, we found out that less has been done in Nigeria, and that picture is also replicated across other countries in Africa. So to ensure a focused and coordinated implementation, African CDC developed a 5-year strategic plan from 2021 to 2025. We shall hear more of that. Now, looking Africa in lens, we have increased awareness now for biosafety and biosecurity due to COVID-19 pandemic and the Ebola virus disease of 2014. Ebola virus in 2014 almost brought down West Africa from Guinea to Liberia to Nigeria. Nigeria has its own fair share of that. And then it's also the expanding partner base, specifically supporting biosafety. We see this as opportunity. We see this as opening. We see this as strength for us to build our resilience and our capacity and capability in biosafety and biosecurity domain. There's also existence of regional biosafety and biosecurity technical working group, as well as regional collaboration centers across Africa. Now, the multiple completed gap analysis of member states in terms of JE report, as I mentioned earlier, give a guide and into better decision-making process. There's also legal mapping to support implementation of country-specific whole of government, national biosafety and biosecurity legal instruments. Nigeria is as advanced in this particular area. And also in Africa, we're looking at African peculiarities, that there's limited funding to implement biosafety and biosecurity. There's also inadequate national and international financing of sustainable biosafety and biosecurity capability. Now, this is actually questioned because sometimes resources are available, but they're disproportionately allocated, removing emphasis from biosecurity and biosafety. And there's also the issue of political and social unrest. I think this particular June edition is actually centered on, is being propped up by what happened in Sudan. And then there's also the threat of emerging and re-emerging biological threats, which we see. Now, these threats are in different forms. Some are naturally occurring. We have those that can affect man, animal, plants, and the environment. We have those that result in significant health, economic, social, and national security impact. We have also diseases that threaten the whole global space, as we saw in COVID-19. When we come into the economies, we begin to see what has happened in this domain. Now we have accidental biological threats. Here we are looking at in COVID-19, for example, in Nigeria, before COVID-19, we had about 3 or 4 molecular labs. But after COVID-19, or during COVID-19, we have over 100 molecular labs. So you see that with the plethora of molecular labs, it also increased the risk of laboratory accidents. When you have 4 cars on the road and you have 400 cars on the road on the same space, the risk of accident is higher when you have 400 cars on the road. That is why it's a post-COVID-19 era is posing a different challenge in terms of biosafety and biosecurity. Now, research uses also, as with the labs available, with a lot of research are going on in terms of vaccine development, found out that in a bid to develop countermeasures, in a bid to understand future outbreaks, in a bid to predict future outbreaks, in a bid to build laboratory, which before now maybe have insufficient biocontainment to make them enabled for bio risk level, we found out that a lot of these researches are also thrown up challenges of accidental biological threat to our environment. And then we have the deliberate biological threat, which falls in our main domain. Here we're looking at access by state or non-state actors who present a significant challenge to national and security. And then we have many non-state groups, terrorist groups acting across Africa, West Africa, from Libya to Nigeria, down to Uganda now, down to Sudan. So a lot of things. And then the increasing awareness of synthetic biology. The YouTube is not helping matter in that regard because of DIY, do-it-yourself biology. So biological agent as weapon can easily be developed. And then the storage of pathogens in laboratories that lack appropriate biosecurity measures all could lead to deliberate biological threats. And then clinical samples from pandemic can also increase biosecurity vulnerability when there's breach of security in their containment device. Now, looking at this chart here, the concept of human security, I found this chart very interesting. You find out that this is just capture the essence of human security with multiplayer, with multifactorial indicators. You find out that security has economic bearing, food security, health security, environmental, personal, community, and political. All these can lead to a comprehensive security for the Africa. And until we look at the various domains of human rights domain, human security domain, freedom from war, freedom from diseases, Africa will remain vulnerable to possible experimentation, to possible disruption of our present economy. Now, according to Robert McNamara, a Secretary of Defense in 1963, He said, in a modernizing society, security means development. Security is not only military, it may involve it may encompass or include hardware, but that security is development. I'm trying to rush. What it means is that Africa cannot achieve its development all around until security is achieved. And that is why the importance of biosecurity is very prime. In terms of nations have international interests. Every nation has international interests. Every nation has national interests. I will come to this. Now, this was a meeting of some South African states. This happened just about 2 weeks ago on Regional Export Control Conference for South African states to enhance capacity for UN Security Council Resolution 1540. This Nigeria is actually a part of this part of this treaty aimed at preventing or multiplication or development of biological weapons. So every country that is a signatory to this resolution is to ensure that nations do not allow proliferations of biological weapons. And it now means that, like Nigeria, as far back as 2003, has already given a report of our adherence to this to see that biological weapons do not proliferate. The government will not look the other way while rogue elements or non-state actors are engaged in proliferation of this. Now, this is just capture it. In the 21st century, this in context, if terrorists have access to biological chemical weapons, it can pose a real threat to countries of the world. And there's paradigm shift. There's just, I'm trying to rush to the cross of the presentation. Now, as far back as 1996, James Woosley, who was the director of CIA to Bill Clinton, he said, for America, that the single most dangerous threat to our national security is the foreseeable future in its biological terrorism. Now, what is bioterrorism? It's all about deliberate use of biological agents, microorganisms, pathogens, and toxins by releasing or disseminating to cause harm in the form of illness or death to humans, crop, livestock, animals, and the natural environment. The weapons can be effective too for terrorists also, to cause terror, to cause fear. Why? Because oftentimes they're inexpensive to produce and to use. You don't need a lot of technical expertise to use biological weapons. Apart from this, biological weapons are literally easy to produce from modern biological tools of genetic engineering, cloning, and molecular biology applications. In this context, we have 4 categories of biological agents, A, B, C, based on the risk, based on the highest risk to the lowest risk, based on mortality, based on fatality, based on spread, based on design, and based on the future it has on the economy. Now, smallpox, for example, the fact that the stock of smallpox still exists means that accidental or deliberate release, smallpox eradicated far back in 1970s. Now, a small part of it is still in the lab. What happened is a breach of security. And we found out that if it becomes a biological weapon, it means that would be a threat to both civilian and military population. And also, there's already a potential for smallpox epidemic of man-made origin as a result of monkeypox, as a result of research, as a result of vaccine development. That is why Africans on its own, as stakeholders, we must up our game. What of viral hemorrhagic fevers? Because the RN virus, I'll skip this. Now, example, the dengue, the Ebola, the Lassa, the Marburg, the yellow fever. We see what happened in 2014 with Ebola. Now, this Ebola, that ricin use. Ricin use is popular and effective agent in small-scale operation assassination. It has potential to be inexpensive, easily produced in large quantity. However, the training required to purify ricin is so that's why ricin toxicity it's not so prominent. But in recent times, with the training and retraining, we found that there's more awareness of growing drought-resistant crop with economic value like castor oil, where ricin can be extracted from. Found that because of drought in Africa, many farmers are going into castor oil production. And with that, with the use of ricin, of castor oil, which has used in surgery, used in medicine, used in other biogas industry, the tendency is that ricin can become a thing to worry about in next years. Now, coming to COVID-19, that shuts down the world. As at yesterday night, we had about 687 million cases worldwide, with Africa having about 12 million cases. Then we have about 6.8 million dead, with Africa having 258,000 dead. And then, so you find out that COVID-19 came in 2019, 2020, 2021. It shook global economics. There was a global lockdown all over the world with loss of human life. We lost a lot of doctors, a lot of health workers were lost, a lot of people died from COVID-19, which origin is still being debated, whether it was man-made or whether it was accidental. So that brings to fore that oftentimes, whether it's man-made or accidental, the effect is equally heavy on both sides, both the initiator and those and the supposedly victim. That is why we need to look at strategies put in place. Economic cost of COVID-19 is billions of dollars, as you can see. For example, shut down in Liberia in 2014, for example, the GDP growth declined from 8% during the Ebola outbreak, according to Victoria Frank, Dean and Lawrence of Harvard Public School Research. Now, what are the implications of bioterrorism and biological weapons on our security? The human cost, the loss of expertise from death, the huge economic crisis on lockdown, underdevelopment, agitation for change of government, and then weakened health system. Already, Africa is bedeviled with weak health system. We found out that bioterrorism and biological welfare will further weaken our health system because it will be so overwhelming that the responsibility of government is going to be near zero. That is why we need to keep it from happening. Now, strategies for control. I come to this proper, I will spend some time here. In terms of, there has to be national strategy, there has to be sub-regional strategy, there have to be regional strategy and international cooperation. For example, in Nigeria, we have the National Security Strategy of 2019, which is in place till next year, is due for 5-year review. It aptly captured public health as a form of threat to national security. With global warming, with change in population density, population explosion, overcrowding, climate change, the National Security Strategy of Nigeria captured that public health threat has the capability to unsettle national security. Then, nations have to key into UN Resolution 1540 to see that on their own, they take a responsibility. Because when you come to US 1540, the challenge of that resolution is that who enforces it? Who is going to enforce that every country that signed is up to its responsibility to prevent proliferation? So that is what that means, is going to draw on the moral conscience of leadership of African countries to see that their ground, their country is not used as a ground for proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. African leadership, Nigerian government, Ghanaian government, South African government, Liberian government, every African country, the leadership must own it that if we sign 1540 resolution, it means that ground will not. It means that every country will have to put in place policy. I will expand on that policy to see that what is being done is what needs to be done is being done. We have the Biological Commission in Nigeria. We have the NCDC, Center for Disease Control, that is into active surveillance. Then we have the ECOWAS protocol. Then we have the regional support. Here we're looking at African CDC, the Biosafety and Biosecurity Initiative of 2016, which has come up with a regulatory and certification framework for institutions handling high pathogens as to what is the minimum requirement, what is the minimum criteria, what is the qualification needed, what is the level of security clearance needed for people that handle high pathogens, which high pathogens allowed. That is why biorisk management is institutionalized. So across Africa, we need to see that in order to combat bioterrorism and biological welfare, we need to institutionalize biorisk management. I'm proud to say that about 2 weeks ago, UNSA was invited to the University of Abuja in Nigeria, where biorisk management was launched as an institution. The Vice Chancellor was there, the Deputy Vice Chancellor academics, the Vice Chancellor admin, all were on ground to give support to see that biosafety and biosecurity assume its rightful place if we are to secure Africa. Now, international cooperation from the partners in Africa, USCDC, the Central National Laboratory, has been involved in training because strategy speaks of ways and means. How do we, because you cannot fight what you don't identify. So Sunday National Lab, for example, has been involved in training resources across the academia, across the industry, across law enforcement agencies in Africa. We are in Sierra Leone sometime in February, where we're in Lagos sometime, and trainings have been going on across other African countries to build capacity. So one of the strategies would be that governments of African countries have to key into this to train capacity, so we can have a reserve army that can identify. Because, like we say in public health, that prevention is far cheaper and better than cure. So you find out that there's a need for us to work to build capacity among law enforcement agents, among researchers, especially researchers that are working with dual use, who are doing dual use substances, dual use resources that can be used for positive research findings or for negative destructive tendencies. We need to do this. Another area of cooperation that Africa will need to look into is working with WHO. I think very soon there will be another JEE, joint external evaluation across African countries. I think Sierra Leone also have done their own already. There's a need for us to substitute, to key into joint external evaluation of our system, to especially the biosecurity and the biosafety thematic area, to know exactly what is the capability of each nation. Because they said, as I said, that a chain is as strong as the weakest link. So that if the JE of a country is having 4/5 in biosecurity, another one is having 1/5, it means that the average is going to be down to 3. That means that every African country as a strategy to prevent bioterrorism is to see that all the pillars are strengthened to form a strong chain around African health system. To control, in this regard, there will need to be a conscious policy development in vaccine development, in surveillance, in detection and response. In Nigeria, the NCDC has been involved in surveillance. What is surveillance aimed to? At early detection of emerging diseases, re-emerging diseases. We're looking at, is there any new thing that has not before in a population group? So that is why there has to be a conscious deliberate funding of in-country surveillance, in-country detection, in-country response. Response at the public health level, response at the clinical level, response at individual level, response at subnational level. Interestingly, in Nigeria, health is on what we call concurrent list. It means the federal government, the state government, and local government all have a stake in health security. Looking in international language, it means the national and the subnational entities all have a role to play. Another strategy, it will be to improve risk communication and advocacy. Like this meeting now, this webinar is aimed at promoting that advocacy to promote risk communication across experts, across stakeholders, across researchers in the biosafety and biosecurity domain. There will also be need to establish management of logistic management system. During COVID-19, most of health resources couldn't come into Nigeria because the supply chain in India was disrupted. So Africa has to look inward to see that we have our own manufacturing and supply chain in place so that before things come up, they are picked up on time. There will be also need to do resource management and mobilization by fighting insider threat. I've given a lecture on insider threat. It's something that every country must look into. That means that for us to combat terrorism, we need to embrace the whole of society approach at national and global security using the acronym PN. The policy, the academia, the policymakers, the academia. By academia, we mean those who are teaching, the industry and research. For example, in Nigeria, getting biorisk management into the curriculum is at advanced stage. Why? Because if you can train a crop of human resource to detect early, to find early, it means at every point in time, we can pick out something that is tending. For example, the nature of researches going on across African universities. The nature of researches going on in South Africa, in Algeria, in Nigeria, in Uganda, in all the countries of Africa. When we have academia that understand bioterrorism and how slippery that ground could be, it means that we are fighting it headlong using a multi-pronged approach. I know that each nation has the national interest in terms of research, in terms of development. For example, in Nigeria, Our interests are to preserve Nigerian sovereignty, territorial integrity, security, and the welfare of our people. By this, we mean that Nigeria will continue to contribute to maintenance of international peace, security, and cooperation, as well as prevention and resolution of intrastate, interstate, regional, and international conflict. In fact, that means that whatever happened in Sudan cannot be a Sudan affair. No. Whatever happened in other countries, when you see non-state actors occupying a land, a country far from Sudan cannot say it's not my business. No, it means all of us must have our ears open, our eyes open to see movement. What happened in Libya? When Muammar Gaddafi was removed, a lot of small weapons fill West Africa, which effect is still being felt. So this is to be told that our national interest should drive everyone to see that any red flag of biological terrorism is reported to appropriate superior authority for action. Our strategy is to see that diseases are well fought for. In Nigeria, in recent times, in Nigeria, in terms of assessing strategy, we have Terrorism Prevention Act, we have the NACTES, that is the National Counterterrorism Strategy. Nigeria has developed National Action Plan on chemical, biological, medical, nuclear, and explosive. At advanced stage, Nigeria, I'm happy to announce, is the Center of Excellence. The ONSA office coordinating has been designated Center of Excellence, Nuclear Security, because of the importance. Don't forget that nuclear can also have a biological component. Then there's also the National Needs Assessment for gaps and capability by national team has been done. There's National Action Plan on biosecurity by Nigeria Management for Biosecurity Agency has been done. And then there's also the National Crisis Management Doctrine. This doctrine is a document that I'm suggesting that every African country will need to develop their own crisis response so that we can synergize across the regions of Africa, so that whenever there's crisis, whether flood, whether bioterrorism, because oftentimes the difference between bioterrorism and biological warfare is just a state of the mind, the intent, the capability, the risk profiling of actors involved. A researcher that go broke can become vulnerable to exploitation, to use research findings to undermine national security. In that context, people are likely going to suffer. That is why there's need for a whole of society approach into looking at what effort is each nation making to secure their own country. If every nation secure their country from infiltration, from rogue element, Africa is going to be secure. In conclusion, sustained effort at heightened surveillance at a clinical service point, as well as improved border security and intersectoral collaboration are crucial at mitigating bioterrorism and biological warfare from disrupting national and international security. A robust biosecurity program will be hinged on pragmatic leadership and readiness to adapt to best global practices in a growing field. If we fail in our duties as researchers, if we fail in our duties as academics, if we fail in our duty as clinicians, as a lab scientist, if we fail to report, if you fail to diagnose properly, Africa has failed. This is so true to the fore that everyone is a stakeholder in preventing bioterrorism in Africa. And again, just to further paint the picture that what happened in Wuhan got around to the whole world in less than 6 weeks. Wuhan, first case of COVID diagnosed 31st of December. Before February, almost 80 countries of the world had gotten COVID-19. That just tells you how small the world has become. That is why whatever is happening in Africa, in any part of Africa, should be a concern to us in this webinar. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I'm able to convey a message that our strategies have to be all-encompassing, all of society, involving the academia, the policy, the industry, and the practitioners. Some references to research materials are shown. Thank you for listening. God bless you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Damisah, for such a very commendable presentation, so enlightening, so detailed. You literally took us from the simple to the complex. You broke down, the presentation was very encompassing. You took us from the history, you took us to citing the things that have happened in the past. You took us to even definition of terminologies for, in case anybody that is joining us and then you're not so familiar with terminologies, you explain the concept of bioterrorism. You even cited examples of how some of the diseases have been used, such as you talked about one of the diseases, you even talked about the Ebola, you talked about, you literally took us through the knowledge of how biological samples or biological materials can be used as a weapon of warfare. And then I remember you also cited something which caught my glance. You made an analogy, like imagine where 4 cars used to be on a road, and now you have about 400 cars. You can see the pressure that is going to happen, which as a result of the increase in number of biological laboratories in our country and even across the continent of Africa. And then you made us even understand that some of those biological weapons can go into the continent or can go into any country or community through accidental use. Maybe the biological samples were not properly kept. And I love the way you actually concluded your presentation, which you cited that imagine what happened in Wuhan. We did a space of 2 months. It happened in December, and we did a space of 2 months. By February, a whole lot of it has actually spread across board. And then I also love the fact that you highlighted to us some of the strategies that are going on, even in Nigeria, in Africa at large, which include the training of the military officers, such a way that it can be able to detect, they can have the skills, they can have the knowledge about detection of this biological warfare, and they can also help in combating it. I also love the fact that you listed out so many policies, because such as what I've earlier mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, that today's webinar will be addressing strategies, we'll be addressing policies, and we'll be addressing institutions. And I want to say that your presentation definitely covered all of these 3 highlights. You highlighted the strategy, you highlighted the institutions that have been operating and have started. You also highlighted the policies that are currently on ground. So thank you so much, Dr. Damisah, for such a commendable presentation. And I'm sure that our participants do have lots of questions for you. So please be on standby. You can see. So if you have any questions, dear participants, if you have any questions, please do make use of your chat box. You have your chat box, the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. I want you to drop your questions, and I will definitely read it out during our question and answer section. So I also want to do a bit of recognizing of our participants. We have our second speaker on standby already. So good afternoon, Dr. Olivier. Nice to have you on board. But please do allow me to recognize our participants. I want us to know that GET webinar is attended across the globe. And even looking at our chat box, I just want to pay a little bit of homage to all of our participants that have joined us. Going through our chat box, thank you so much, all of our participants, for introducing yourself. I would just like to list some of those people that actually join us. We have people joining us from Philippines. We have somebody join us, said greetings from UHealth PRE, African Center and Infectious Disease Research Officer based in Liberia. We have Rick joining us from Netherlands. We have Mikalia joining us from South Africa. We have somebody joining us from Peru. We have people joining us from Abuja. It's so good to have. We have somebody joining us from Uganda. We have people joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. We also have somebody joining us from Libya, National Center for Disease Control. We have someone joining us from Pakistan. We do have somebody joining us from Kenya. We have quite a lot of people joining us from Kenya. We have quite a lot of people joining us from Nigeria. Reading here, we have somebody joining us from medical laboratories. Somebody said the medical laboratory scientist from Nigeria. We have also quite a lot of people joining us from Uganda. I also saw here that we have somebody joining us from Ghana. I do have somebody also joining us from Tanzania and Finland. We have somebody who said, my name is Alan Fogarty, a senior researcher from Georgetown University Center for Global Earth Science and Security in Washington, D.C. We have somebody joining us from Swaziland. Quite a lot of people actually joining us. So this webinar is a global webinar. We have someone joining us from Ethiopia. I'm sure if I decide to go around about everybody that has listed out their details in the chat box, it's quite a huge. This is a global webinar, and I'm glad that even our speakers are also global speakers. Our webinar has featured speakers from different parts of the world, not just Nigeria. We have our speakers from America. We have somebody, we have people featured from different parts of the world, outside the continent of Africa, and it's such a very rich, webinar. All right, so before I bring Dr. Olivier Manigart on board, I would also like to talk about ISBIO. so that you can get to know him. At least if you've not met him personally, you can also get to know him through his biography. All right, so I'm going to be reading Dr. Olivier Manigart's biography. Dr. Olivier is an experienced clinical and a vaccine trial expert with more than 25 years experience in health research, with expertise in virology, microbiology, epidemiology, quality management system, and Dr. Olivier has a proven track record in managing complex projects for epidemiological and laboratory network. And he has deeply collaborated with the major stakeholders on laboratory implementation projects across the world. Dr. Manigart is currently the senior team leader for GFA Consulting Group to support the West Africa Health Organization, WAHO, with the project of establishment of a regional epidemiological surveillance system funded by the German Development Bank, KfW. Dr. Manigart is motivated by the impact of public and private interventions on public health and by One Health team, and has been passionate about retrovirology since the early stages of his career as an agronomist and the impact of infectious diseases on livestock. Furthermore, the aspects of quality management system, as well as biosecurity, biosafety, environmental and social aspects have always motivated his orientation, the orientation he has given to his work. Dr. Manigart is also a certified member of the International Federation of Biosafety Association, IVA, on biorisk management. As a result of this experience, Dr. Manigart is now a key player in understanding and implementing pandemic prevention projects in the context of One Health. All right, so before I actually bring Dr. Manigart, I would like us to know that Dr. Manigart will be talking on the topic saying, what should African government do to prevent bioterrorism and biowarfare in Africa? All right, so I would like to bring Dr. Manigart on board. Hello, Dr. Manigart. Good to have you once again on GET webinar series.
Hello, Ifeo. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much to the organizers for allowing me to give a presentation on behalf of the West African Health Organization on this important topic that is right on time, I think, after what occurred in Sudan. But I would rather speak about the activities that we are implementing with WAHO to tackle these important issues of biorisk management as a whole. I'll switch off my camera because I'm in Bobo Dioulasso, and the connection is often a bit erratic, so please allow me to switch this off. And first of all, I would like to share with you all some notes that I took ahead of this presentation. And first of all, I want to thank also Dr. Damisah for setting up very brightly the context of this important problem. I'll go back to some basics with the definition that was given by NATO in 2010 of a biological weapon. This is an item of material which projects, disperses, or disseminates a biological agent, including arthropod vectors. And I think it should include also all kind of vector. But basically, what is important here is a biological weapon can affect all types of populations without any distinction with the gender or age. And it is not possible or very difficult to control the space and the time of the reminiscence of the pathogens that they use or the toxins. And up to now, there are, to my knowledge, 4 main international regulations or conventions that are used across the world to really monitor everything around biosafety and biosecurity. And these are the Convention of Geneva, the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention that was mentioned also by Dr. Levin, and the Chemical Weapons Convention. But most of all, we now use mainly the UN 1540 since 2004. And the difference is non-state actors that are defined as persons or entities not acting under the lawful authority of a state can carry out activities that fall within the scope of this resolution. And this is really important, I think, and something that should definitely be considered, I think, for the African continent. And most of all, it emphasizes also that there should be cooperation between the states and an internal control within the states. And to accompany this, there's been several tools that have been developed by the United Nations and everybody who's involved into these topics. And one of the main one was the confidence building measures, and there are 7. And I think it's important to cite them. So the first one is the exchange of data and the exchange of information on national biological defense research and development programs. Next, the exchange of information on the occurrence of infectious disease and similar occurrences caused by toxins. Next, encouraging the publication of scientific research results and promoting knowledge. Then actively promoting contracts, reporting legislation, regulations, and other measures, declaration of past activities in offensive and or defensive areas of biological research and development programs, and the declaration of vaccine production units. And in Africa, you certainly know that we are pushing now currently to develop those vaccine production units, and especially in West Africa, where WAHO is working. So we are particularly attentive to this. But practically, there are, especially for us in Africa, some inefficiency of international laws. First of all, the reports are confidential. The main participants in those committees are the Western countries from which they originate. The relationship between a country's level of economic development and its interest in the non-proliferation of biological weapons, a lack of resource to implement them, little effect on the perception of the threat. Inspection reports have often been incomplete. There is only one real regional or bilateral cooperation, and the form of activity reports is at the discretion of the signatory state issuing it to the community. And these are serious caveats, I think, on which we have to think about. And then there are several groups of experts that have been implemented, but practically they had limited actions. And there are other groups that were created since 1995, and we should probably think about having more other groups. And certainly we should have some with recognized local experts in Africa, and particularly to our concern for West Africa. And I here definitely agree with Professor Damisah and the statements that he made in his presentation. And I'm sure that I can share with you now some of the activities we've been implementing with WAHO. So it's a great honor for me to speak about this. I'm sorry, I'm not at the right place. So I'll quickly go back to the beginning. So I would like to share with you all the activities that we've been doing for the last few years with the West African Health Organization on biosafety and biosecurity, and in particular, the rise and implementation of the West African Biological Risk Management Network that we call the WABNet, and that we have set up over the last few years with the contribution of all the associations that you may see on this slide, and also with the support of the International Federation of Biosecurity Association. And IFBA is very active worldwide, in advocating for these issues, and in biosafety training and certification particularly. So to set up the problem of biological risk management in Africa in two perspectives, we can say that since the early 2000s, programs have been devised to set up quality management systems, which already include a large biosafety, biosecurity component throughout the continent, but especially at the beginning, I may say, in South and East Africa. And would like to point out here that the introduction of quality management system already largely cover many aspects of biosafety. And unfortunately, we have to admit that in West Africa, we have often been behind the times, and that even today, we still have many laboratories, including some reference laboratories, working in unacceptable biosafety conditions, as you can see from these photos taken recently. And one doesn't need to be a great certified expert to understand that we are here outside acceptable international standards. So a great part of work was carried out by several teams. First, to assess the level of implementation of biological risk management in West Africa. And all these different work led to the reflection on the possibility and necessity of creating this West African biological risk management network. And several events developed his birth and his rise. First of all, a meeting in Tunisia between biosafety association from Mali and from Nigeria mainly, that were already existing in the region, and that's thanks again to the support of IFBA and also the African Society of Laboratory in Medicine. And this is where in Tunisia this proposal was evoked. But this first materialization with the involvement of WAHO, the West African Health Organization, at a meeting in Dakar, that was a little later in 2018, and which also involved many key partners, including WHO Afro, IFBA, Fondation Mérieux, the GET, Institut Pasteur de Dakar, where the meeting took place, etc. And following this, very quickly, a working group was established, a group which more recently has been expanded to include other experts of the region, as the number of certified experts is also expanding, and also to extend the reflections on the various aspects necessary for this network. And it is important to note that we, together with this prestigious technical working group, created and validated the West African Biological Risk Management Network, the WABNet, in October 2021, during a virtual conference because of the COVID-19 pandemic also. And this activity was attended by more than 50 participants from all ECOWAS countries, as well as key stakeholders, again, from WHO, African CDC, European Union, etc. So that's how these terms of reference were developed and validated. And we also developed a 5-year strategic plan in November 22. And these, the action plan really include many of the items that were mentioned also by my predecessor, Dr. Damisah. And so I want to share with you a few of the aspects of this WABNet. First of all, the vision. It's to achieve sustainable biosafety and biosecurity capabilities, both for facilities and human resources, and ensure that these are available in West Africa to enable the proper, safe, and secure handling of dangerous and high-risk pathogens. and the missions, availability of effective certified facilities in the region, availability of adequately trained and certified human resources, and support the West African countries in development and implementation of biosafety policies, guidelines, and SOPs, standard operating procedures. And WAHO will serve as the network pedestal, advocating and facilitating the adoption of standardized and uniform approaches across the 15 ECOWAS member states. And WABNet will in turn serve as WAHO's platform for the coordination and harmonization of biosecurity and biosafety as an essential element of public health security system. And so the WABNet coordination unit is located at the WAHO Public Health and Research Departments in Bobo-Dioulasso. And the unit is supported by several boards that advise the Secretariat, and the Secretariat implements, the Executive Board implements the activities of the strategic plan. And at the same time, several technical working groups or committees support and advise the boards and the Secretariat. And the Secretariat has currently been elected for 2 years, and WABNet is due to meet once a year. And none of this would have been possible without the associations and the volunteer networks that carry out the work and advocacy on the ground. And that's with the authorities and with the institutions concerned by this. So you can see here the names of the people who are involved into the different boards and into the technical working group committees. And so here I will appeal to all of you, because these committees have been were set up during the validation of the strategic plan and the governance manual in Cotonou in November 22, but they aren't really developed yet. So if you are volunteer from West Africa willing to participate, please feel free to contact us. So now I'll go to the achievements that we've done, which is to me really important, because we certify people across the region, but we also do other things that I would like to share with you. So what have we achieved so far? We have the strategic plan, and a large part of it concerns the quality management system implementation. And that's also through a project that I'm leading at WAHO, which we called ProLab, to strengthen the epidemiological surveillance through laboratory systems. And for QMS, we are using the WHO 5-star SLIPTA approach, stepwise laboratory improvement towards accreditation. And we collaborate a lot with WHO, but also with our main partner for this, which is the African Society for Laboratory in Medicine. And we have 25 laboratories that we are currently supporting in the West African region. And this is really where we can, I think, translate the theory into clear actions. We had an initial, the strategy and that we use is that we had an initial workshop in Dakar in October 2018. And we noticed that there was a wide disparity between the laboratories in the project, and that the level was generally low, as I said, in the ECOWAS. So we trained a cohort, a pool of auditors and coaches, and those carry out audits and coaching sessions. And we consider now that we are in a form of routine where most of the laboratories have the motivation to make progress in the process. And so we are seeing impressive improvements for most of them. And I can show you a table of progress if necessary, if we have a discussion on this. But we have 5 laboratories that are ready to go that have achieved the 5-star status and that are now ready to go for accreditation with the SOAC for the French-speaking countries. And we work in Nigeria with the Medical Laboratory Science Council of Nigeria, the MLSC SCN, led by Dr. Donald Ofili, who is also a close collaborator in everything that we are doing, and also the chair of the African CDC Technical Working Group that Dr. Jorez, who had to speak, is leading in the region. And we are working all closely together, as well with other partners like WHO, with the Strong Lab project, with the World Bank for Prédicé, and Fondation Mérieux with the Rizal Lab network, all of these doing similar things. And we like to say that WAHO is active in trying to harmonize the activities that are occurring in the region around what we are doing. So next, for biorisk management per se, which covers biosecurity and biosafety, that's the protection of personnel as well as the protection of the samples against death or damage, and which is also the topic of this webinar. And we have set up several activities around this theme in collaboration with IFBA again. First of all, we organized a workshop in Dakar, as I said, with key players in the sub-region to harmonize the training curriculum for trainers in the sub-region. And at this meeting, an important decision that was briefly, I must say, published in this abstract on MDPI, a decision that was taken is that that you can see on the right, it's the fact that the people who will be trainers on biological risk management in the region will have to have at least been certified for the first 2 modules of the IFBA training course. And those 2 modules are the biological risk management and biosecurity. And this is to avoid any potential eccentric people who might claim to be expert without having any real certification training. So I made myself the effort to take this training, so I would encourage anyone interested to take these important steps. And as Jorez is not there, I want to say that African CDC is also proposing now a larger training which really covers many different topics. It's a long-lasting training, but the entrance gate is favorized if one possesses already an IFBA certification. So there's a link between those 2 aspects. But we want to be sure that the trainers that we are confronted to in West Africa are really well-trained people. So we did a first training with about 50 people in Niamey, November 2021, a second one in Ouagadougou in 2022, with again 50 trainers. And we did the last one on the module 1 of IFBA last week in Ouagadougou again, with 80 participants to catch up with all the ones that wanted to do this IFBA module 1 training through our program with WAHO. So another aspect that is practical and that we did is developing a policy for the biomedical waste management or the waste from healthcare activities at risk of infection. And we've been working to assess the situation in the sub-region to draw up guidelines and to advocate for the use of incinerators or other waste banalization stations, and to turn them into income-generating activities with the ProLab project. And the ProLab project supplies incinerators or equivalent equipment to the ECOWAS region. And Also, to assess the situation in the ECOWAS, we developed this policy that was approved at the last meeting of health minister. Also, WAHO sent a questionnaire to all 15 countries and carried out a more in-depth analysis with site visits to 5 countries. And that's what led us to develop this policy and also a strategic plan for the 15 ECOWAS countries in Abidjan in September 22. So this is an important information, I think, for the West African region, because this document should be promoted at the national level. So I'll say briefly what other things we are doing as achievements. We developed also with the GET group a biosecurity policy. Perhaps Dr. Dotun, who's with us, could also expand on this. And we are promoting the development at this stage of integrated biological sample transport system. And we are currently implementing this in Niger. So in Niger, we managed to put everyone from the quadripartite of human, animal, and environmental and agricultural aspects of the One Health quadripartite. And we just completed a major workshop in Niamey where we brought together all the ministries and partners concerned to develop a national roadmap to group together all the vertical systems that exist in the past. The polio system, HIV, TB, meningitis, essentially, which are the main system as in many countries in the region. All these systems were vertical. And we managed to agree on developing an horizontal system with the postal service that benefits all the program in a holistic way. So we are working with an NGO, which is called Davicas, and very active, and that has been proved its worth in this area in Burkina Faso, because in Burkina Faso, where I live, where I'm from, we have a very good system that's functioning very well, although in some regions it's difficult now with the political unrest, but it's a very well functioning systems for working with the postal service. And we hope to take advantage of those 2 successful models to develop a regional model for all countries that do not yet have such a system at national level. And we also recently held a regional maintenance workshop on maintenance and metrology, which are major gaps for many countries and that are also linked directly to biosecurity, even more probably to biosafety. And so we try to develop a program with that could benefit all countries with experts from the region, building on the same model as what we did for quality management system with a cohort of engineers and technologists that would work around all countries in the West African region. And very importantly, I think, and that's perhaps something to be debated, we have this program to equip 25 laboratories in the network, not only with laboratory equipment, but also with solar power, incinerators, refurbishment, renovation. And this is where the ProLab WebNet project might have a drastic impact on improving biosecurity in the West African region, I must say, as this is the opportunity for reinforcing control measures, like, for instance, putting CCTV systems or being sure that there's an access control to the laboratories of the network, among other things. So we'll end up here with the acknowledgement of the West African Current Biorisk Management Network Technical Working Group, where you see the names and all the biosecurity and biosafety partner association and the financial and technical partners, obviously, that support us. So thank you very much to all for your attention, and over to you, Ifeo.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Olivier. Thank you for taking us through your thoughts, and also thank you for your presentation as well. I must say that one of the things that was very striking, for me was the first picture that you showed in your slide, which shows it showed different laboratories and how exposed it is. In fact, that alone have actually showed that there is so much need to be done. And then indeed, there's a need to raise awareness on bioterrorism, looking at how exposed the biological samples in various laboratories. I could so relate to it that there are so many exposure of that around us. And that means that if care is not taken, a whole country or a whole community can just be wiped out if biological samples or biological materials from any laboratory is not well disposed or well managed. And also thank you for taking us around the activities of what is happening in WAHO. And thank you for introducing us to WAPNet. And also, I'm very sure our participant actually had that they can actually reach out if they are interested in volunteering for WAPNet. And also, thank you for taking us through the various activity, the strategy work, and also all the amazing work you're doing through WAPNet. We have learned quite a lot. Because of our time, once again, I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Olivier, for coming again on GELT's webinar and for sharing with us the amazing work you're doing all around Africa. Yes, I'm so glad to see my organization logo. And yes, I think Dr. Dottie is also on the call. And I'm sure maybe after the question and answer, he will definitely also contribute to the topic on ground. So please, let's move on to the question and answer. I saw in the chat box, a lot of people are asking, would they have access to the recordings or the presentations of today's webinar? And indeed, our communication officer has also stated in the chat box that alongside with your certificate of attendance, you'll be sent the link to how you can access the recording of today's webinar. I also want to let you know that we post the videos or the recordings of our webinar on our YouTube channel. So you can also get to follow Get Africa on YouTube. You will see all of our, we have archive of our past webinar series on our YouTube channel. And then also, let's just go straight to the question and answer. We have several questions here. Please do drop your questions in the Q&A box. If you drop your questions in the chat, it might be quite difficult for us to be able to track it, or you might lost, and miss the conversation. Okay, so the first question that we have here, I can see that one of the questions have been answered. Okay, all right. So somebody said, dear speaker, thank you for your presentation. Practical question: how do a researcher conduct a risk assessment and implement contingency plan during cholera outbreak? All right, so that's the person's question. I will just direct this question. I'm sure our two speakers can definitely give an answer to this question. So I would like to have the input of Dr. Damisah and also the input of Dr. Olivier on this question. So I want Dr. Damisah to go first, while Dr. Olivier just take a bit rest after his presentation. So Dr. Damisah, somebody just asked, said, how do a researcher conduct a risk assessment and implement contingency plan during cholera outbreak? Because I know that you talked about risk management, risk communication during your presentation.
All right, thank you very much. I didn't get the person that has a question, but thank you for that question. Okay, Dr. Nutsi Michibuni. So yeah. I hope I pronounced your name very well. Thank you. Cholera is basically a waterborne disease. Oftentimes, cholera outbreak has to do so much with sanitation. So doing a risk assessment is actually multifactorial. I will be able to answer your question in detail because there are many circumstances that surround the researcher. Is the researcher also the sponsor of the research? Are you the one funding? But one of the major limitations in research is funding. What kind of funding do you have? And then is it a peacetime research or a wartime research? These are some of the vagaries that will affect your risk, your profiling, your risk assessment. Is it like, for example, we had cholera outbreak spanning over 6 months in Yemen, but 3 years Hajj period. It lasted for more than 6 months in Yemen, and we need to do this assessment and guide nationals who are going for a religious pilgrimage to Mecca at that period. So Yemen being then under a heavy crisis between rebel and the government. If you want to go there to do research, what kind of research are you going to be looking at? So that's why the question has to contextualize: is it peacetime research or wartime research? But not forgetting the fact that whether peacetime or wartime, people are still going to die, or people will still die. Now, coming to your question, risk assessment, and again, you also ask, it's actually a two-pronged question: risk assessment and how to implement contingency plan. I would say that in terms of risk assessment, you're looking at what is the lifestyle of these people. If it's a people that are already open to open defecation, with the UN, WHO is fighting, there are the people. Different countries have different milestones in terms of curbing. So part of the plan is going to be, how do we stop defecation? What alternative do people have? What are the toilet facilities available for people to do to manage their own fecal effluents? They also want to look at the water supply in this area. What is the source of the water? Is it a river? Is it a stream? Is it pipe-borne water? Is it potable water? So all those are things that they are going to factor into your research. Then contingency plan, of course, you want to stop, you want to reduce case fatality as much as possible, in which case, if cholera outbreak has already taken place, they're going to be working with many stakeholders like the WASH group, going to be involving them, the WASH partners, the WHO WASH partners. We want to involve them in providing pipe-borne water, providing tents, providing drugs, because some eventually will end up in the hospital, IV fluids. So all these are contingency plan has to deal with the environment, the people, and the resources available. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Damisah, for that comprehensive answer, and I'm sure you've actually done a perfect justice to the question. Okay, so I don't know if Dr. Manigart would like to add to that as well.
Well, yeah, I might give some directions that are a bit more general as an advice for all kinds of risk assessment. And by the way, for instance, the IFBA has a specific module on risk assessment. And we are planning to continue the training and certification program with this specific module. Why? Because into the new ISO 15189 2022 guidelines that have been recently published and that we have to apply within the next 3 years, there's so many components of risk assessment. And on a general way, I would direct you to, first of all, the 4th edition of the WHO biosafety manual that is from 2020, I think. And there's a whole chapter on risk assessment. And the risk assessment, the risk is measured by both the consequences and the probability of an event or a threat to occur. And I think for any type of epidemic or pathogen that you are treating in your laboratory, because I assume that you want to do that in your laboratory as you're asking about a contingency plan. For any of these in your lab, you would have to use this system. The second document that is very important onto this topic is the ISO 3501, And so I would advise you to look specifically at these two documents to evaluate the risk in your specific lab, because a risk for a pathogen in one lab is not necessarily the same as a risk in another lab. So okay, thank you. And so I would advise you to do this for any pathogen that you have to treat in your lab. And for cholera, obviously, this is a highly contaminating bacteria. So you have to obviously take the highest contingency plan as it is possible in your conditions. So I'm not sure where you are based. So I hope I answered this a bit more largely than my predecessor, Dr. Levin. Over to you, Ifo.
All right, thank you so much, and Dr. Manigart, for your contribution. I also just want to add to it before I allow you to take a little bit of rest. Somebody said that to curb human error can lead to global epidemic. Do you think the use of AI, artificial intelligence, could be a way out? Someone is asking if you maybe during your work, have you thought about the use of AI or implementation of artificial intelligence to curb human error?
To who are you addressing this question?
To you, Dr. Manigart. Yeah, to you.
Me, I'm definitely not an expert in artificial intelligence, so
okay.
I couldn't answer this, even if I think human errors are always possible. And it's part of the same risk assessment that has to be done in the lab.
All right.
It's part of the safe protection. Over to you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'll just allow you to take a bit of rest before I bring another question to you. So I'm going to be speaking to Dr. Damisah now. Dr. Damisah, have you, because I'm sure you also mentioned that, there are always, because from the laboratory there has been maybe during the waste disposal or the management of biological samples, and because some of these are not properly managed, it has led, this is based on human errors, this has led to burst of some, emergence or reemergence of infectious diseases. So I want to ask, what do you think about the use of AR to limit or to curb human error, especially for our laboratory scientists?
All right. Thank you very much. Like Dr. Olivier just mentioned, we're not expert in AI, but AI is becoming a very highly specialized field. However, judging in the use of AI is actually becoming increasingly important, especially when you are dealing with HRO. HRO means highly reliable organizations, where the outputs, like when we say HRO, highly reliability organizations, like the airline industry, where zero error is what is desired. We desire zero error in airline operations. So the use of AI, like we say in our background, every AI will still need to be managed by the humans. That is why the humans, what we call the human intelligence in our operations, the humans will always supersede technology. Technology will not know if you are sick in a way, but the human factor. So we need to look at what are the causes of error. For example, medical errors, which is interestingly, medical errors are more common than airline errors, as bad as it is. In America, all over the world, medical errors, near miss in theaters. Why is this so? When you look at when you do the etiology, when you do the post-mortem of medical error, most medical errors arise from fatigue. And that brings to fore the place of adequate manpower. And you and I will know that in the last 4 years, Nigeria, for example, Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, for example, we have lost a lot of skilled health manpower to the Western countries. So that alone is going to put additional strain on the already lean human resource that are left in Nigeria or in Africa to work. So when you see somebody doing a shift, I have friends in the UK, for example, 10 patients in a day, you are done. No matter how much you love the work, 10 minutes per patient. But here you see a doctor who is going to see 100 women for antenatal. You see a lab scientist who is going to work on 50 samples in 1 hour. is not a machine. It is going to be prone to error. So even when you say AI should come in, AI will not take blood sample. AI will not label the sample bottle. It is what you feed in the body. Even if you use robots, AI to program to deliver drugs in the world, is the drug you feed into the tray by the human factor that the AI, the robot, will deliver to the patient. We saw AI being used in COVID-19. We see robots taking drugs to different rooms, serving food in hotels. If the wrong food is given to a patient who's diabetic, who make the error? The robot goes to the room and tap and drop food. But the human error, the human factor is the one that says the patient in room 5 is diabetic. Therefore, the food should be as per regimen. The point I'm making is that AI will have a role to play. However, the human factor of fatigue, that means we need to replace as many people that are going out of Africa with coming. That is why health service provision, training nursery hands is very key. Manpower development will need to be brought to fore. And that's why Africans leaders must make Africa attractive to attract and retain trained manpower. So AI has its place, but AI will not take the place of human capability and capacity in handling the system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Damisah, for that contribution. Indeed, what you said is actually very right. And it's been so practical that I'm sure it's very clear to everyone and even to the person that asked the question. All right, so I'll just follow up with another question that someone tagged to you, Dr. Damisah. Someone said, Dr. Levin, thank you for your nice presentation. Yes, they said, how are Nigerian national strategies about COVID-19 sample storage? So I guess the person is asking about the strategies that have been implemented or that are currently on concerning the COVID-19 samples, the storage of COVID-19 samples.
I think in the last meeting we had, one of our top managers at the PTF forum, I can confidently say to you that there's no sleep lost on all the positive COVID-19 samples are well secured in a secure facility with very much restriction to access. So that I can say that every positive sample of COVID-19 is well sequenced and stored. I think I will stop at that. The place I don't need to mention, but they are well secure. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the reassurance. We're so confident having experts like you in terms of affairs that biosecurity measures are properly in place. Thank you so much, Dr. Damisah, once again. All right, so I'll just allow you to take a bit of rest while I move on to Dr. Manigart. Dr. Manigart, there are a set of questions that we have for you. In fact, somebody even wrote here, said, I'm a biosecurity and a biosafety MS student from Burkina Faso. Can you give me an advice on trend research subject that can help me for my career? I think that's a lot. Maybe if you have, if you think you would like to share your email address, such person can actually, or they can follow you on your social media, because that's like an expert consultation already. All right, well, let's just go to a practical question. Someone wrote here, he said, okay, that's okay, Dr. Olivier, I'm Dr. Bago, I'm not Onvigue, I'm not sure if I pronounced the name well, but kindly, I'm sorry for that. He said, the person said he's a biobank expert from Institute Pasteur of Guinea. He said, we are storing human and animal biological samples. As we know, the biological sample storage needs a lot of financial issues. Unfortunately, many African countries are not setting of biobank to make a biosecurity sustainable. So how is WABNET's strategy to cover all West African countries, in particular Guinea?
Okay, thank you very much to Bago Onivogui for this important question. Actually, in the chat box, there are many questions, I think, around storage of biological samples, which is an important topic. So in my presentation, I mentioned the transport of samples, but I forgot to say a few words about the regional biobank. And this is really a WAHO activity, West African Health Organization, where for many years now, there has been a lot of work around also the policies and guidelines for the transfer of samples. And so there are some templates approved by the Assembly of Ministers of the ECOWAS region, documents that have been developed, and among them policies, guidelines, and material transfer agreements. And this is really important, I think. That's the first point. And actually, at the same time, there was a development of the regional biobank that is now implemented at the Institut Pasteur Côte d'Ivoire. So Professor Miredosso has done a massive work on developing this regional biobank with top of state-of-the-art material that is available for the storage of all samples from the region. And the idea is that we should try to build backups and that every country, in every country, there should be a biobank system that could be based on the policies and guidelines that were developed by WAHO. And there should be biobank, and there should be a backup at the regional level at Institut Pasteur de Côte d'Ivoire. I know for Nigeria, Nigeria is so big that there's currently another system that is developed in Nigeria. But for all the other countries, there should be such a system, because we're lacking also, and we're always transferring all the samples to Western countries or to labs with which we have some collaborations, but that doesn't help to develop the region. So the idea is to build the system as a regional biobank system. So that's the only advice, unfortunately, that I could give for Guinea, because WAHO doesn't have a mandate to obviously force the countries. We can only advise the countries to develop their own system. But I'm really surprised that I thought that there was a system at the National Purpose Laboratory in Conakry. So this is certainly something to investigate with your boss at Institut Pasteur de Conakry. That's all I have for now, Ife.
All right, thank you so much. So Dr. Manigart, before you go, I want you to, somebody asked the question, and I know that this question actually need the input of two speakers. I mean, both are speakers. I mean, if we decide to go on and on, we can never forget to mention this aspect. And somebody's written it, it said, my question is about funding. It said, funding research in Africa has always been a challenge. How do you think it can be surmounted or mitigated? You know, so Dr. Manigart, what do you have to say about funding research in Africa?
Well, it's a tricky issue, but I will accompany Dr. Levin in this vision, because funding research is a bit like funding human resource. It's the duty of our governments to realize that there's really a serious need of funding. That's the first point. And we should continue the advocacy among all the health authorities to make everyone understand that research is key for the development of the economy in the continent. So, and that's something that we can also do at WAHO, I think. The second aspect is that to fund your research, you should apply to grants. And there are many grants that are available around the world to any type of research topic. Currently, I'm aware that there's a Grant Challenge Canada. There was a call from the World Bank recently. So there are many calls where motivated and ambitious researchers should apply to, and preferably as a group or even as a consortium. And that's the advice I would give, even for the aspects of biosecurity and biosafety, which is a really hot topic currently. You just have to search the net and look for grants that might be available for these topics. And that's the second aspect. Otherwise, we work with financial and technical partners around the world, and the project I've mentioned, ProLab, is funded by the KfW, that's the German Bank of Development. And at WAHO, we have many different funders that support different programs. And this exists obviously also at the national level for all the countries of the African continent. And so that's a third way probably to investigate, to see how you could get some support for nice research project that you might have in your pocket. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ifeo.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Manigart, for that contribution on funding. I also want Dr. Damisah to talk about it, because I remember you mentioned something about resources during your presentation.
Thank you very much. You know, I was just smiling when I saw the question in the chat box. There's this woman, I think she died some days ago or some weeks ago. The great woman from Ghana, Taidu. I came across a quote about 20 years ago. He said something, and I quote. I'm paraphrasing now because I read the book. He said the solution to Africa's problem will either come from Africa or it does not come at all. Taidu. She's a girl, I think she died in her 80s or so, a few days ago. What I mean is that African problem have to be, our solution has to be African-driven, African domiciled. Of course, the global space means we must partner with other countries. Like I said in the presentation, even the national security strategy of Nigeria still look for international collaboration, regional collaboration. But be that as it may, Africans must begin to look for funding. There's donor fatigue. We can't keep relying, you can't be relying on neighbor to feed you every day. It does not, it's against the law of nature. It's against the law of relevance. That your neighbor feed you every day is difficult. You know, I mean, with every sense of modesty. The Bible says, if you go to your neighbor's house too frequently, you lose your value. You know, so if you are going to be relying on donor fund from every day for everything, there will be donor fatigue. So I think it's time to look inwards and let those that God has blessed, those that are endowed resources, you must begin to see research as part of a philanthropic activity that may not give an immediate benefit, but definitely a long-term benefit. So that if we start having funding in sickle cell anemia, we're having funding in leukemia, we're having funding in biosecurity, in virus management by Africans, you know how much it will be if the 5 richest men in Africa put money together and say, wow, we are going to fund research in the next 5 years in this area. Most of the grants that Dr. Olivier mentioned from the West, most of them are sponsored or endowed trusts from families who have suffered from one tragedy or the other. To immortalize the loss, they start a research grant to people. So it's important for us to know that it can be done locally. Africans can fund research with support from the West. And again, it not tail off, but basically, African government must fund health research. Until that, if we continue to depend on donor funding, it's not sustainable. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. A round of applause for all of our speakers. Thank you so much. If you're in the chat box, I want you to just give our speakers a round of applause. You can use a smiley. We celebrate you. Well, thank you for your enlightenment. Thank you for sharing us your experiences over the years. Thank you so much for your commendable presentation, Dr. Damisah. Your ideas, we celebrate you. We appreciate you. Dr. Manigart, thank you so much for coming on board. Yeah, we can see a lot of our participants are giving you a thumbs up. Some are giving you the round of applause. It was such a very enlightening conversation here. All right, I'll just bring Dr. Ayodeto Bobadoye on board, my boss. I believe that he has 1 or 2 things to input into this conversation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for once again joining the GET webinar series for the month of June. Let me start by saying thank you to our speakers, Dr. Damisah and Dr. Olivier, my very good friends, for for the very detailed presentation we had today. Personally, I've benefited so much from the presentations. And it's because of the quality of our speakers, or the quality of speakers we bring on board every month. Yeah, we are seeing increase in the number of participants that are attending this webinar. Today, even despite the holiday in Nigeria, we've seen almost about 80 participants from almost 30 different countries. And that shows the quality of your presentation and quality of presentations presenters will bring on board for the GET webinar series. I thank you very much for your presentation. And I also thank our participants. Without the participants, this webinar will not be interesting. We thank you for joining us every month to discuss emerging issues in the area of biosecurity, biosafety, and One Health as it affects Africa and Africans. I thank you very much, and we look forward to having you again this time next month. You agree with me that the issue of biosecurity is a very big issue in Africa. We have an increase in frequency and intensity of biosecurity threats, especially on the continent of Africa nowadays. Like Dr. Damisah said, whether natural or artificial, both sources, Africa is getting vulnerable to both natural and artificial sources of biosecurity threats. From the natural source, we're having increase in deforestation, climate change, biodiversity loss, and this is increasing the vulnerability of African countries to biosecurity threats. And from the artificial source, we're having the way we manage our laboratories, the way we're having increase in wars and activities of non-state actors over the years. It's also increasing our vulnerability to biosecurity threats. And that is one of the issues we're discussing today. Like Dr. Damisah said, nobody knew Sudan would be going through what they're going through now. And it makes it worse for one of the fractions to take control of a laboratory that has potential biological materials that can be used can be used as biowars or can cause biosecurity threats. And like we say, threats in one place in Africa, not properly contained, will be a threat to every part of the world. And that shows an emerging trend in Africa that we have to start talking about and we have to find solutions to. And that is why we have decided to organize this webinar today to discuss these very important and emerging issues. We've had our speakers spoken to us in the last one, about 1.5 hours, and they've talked about policies and strategies and ways we can prevent biological warfare in Africa and how we can enhance our biosecurity activities to prevent biosecurity threats and make sure that whether natural or artificial means of biosecurity threat is reduced to the barest minimum in Africa. So thank you again to our participants. Thank you to our speakers. Look forward to seeing you again next month, this time next month, another very important topic that we'll be sharing with you very soon. I wish our Muslim brothers happy Eid al-Kabir, and we look forward to having you again this time next month. Thank you very much and have a very wonderful rest of the day. Bye.
All right, thank you so much, sir. It's at this point we're wrapping up the webinar, but I would also like to also know that you can follow up with GET our various activities on our social media platform. Do follow GET on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, do follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We have various activities that we're pushing out from GET, the Global Emerging Pathogens Treatment Consortium. All right, at this point, thank you so much. Happy Salah once again. Happy Salah to all of our Muslim brothers, Muslim sisters. Do have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful celebration from where you are. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye from me. Okay, yeah, Dr. Damisah wanted to say something.
Send me around, please. Send me around.
I just send you around, no problem. How are you? Who send you around to you?
Around is on the way.
Yeah.
All right.
Around is on the way.
Hey, thank you.
All right,
Thank
bye,
you.
bye. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Enjoy.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Well,
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Levin. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Olivier. Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Tamara.
Bye.